Before we begin, I want you to take a minute. You can hit pause and read through the Emancipation Proclamation again. I think it's important that you read it, and as we talk through it, it will begin to make more sense, because a lot of times the first time people read through it, they miss a pretty key part. So go ahead and hit pause and read through it, and then we'll begin. So to start off, Emancipation Proclamation, I would argue this is the third most important or famous sheet of paper in American history after the Constitution and the Declaration of Independence. So let's look at its title. Emancipate means to set free. Proclamation, the root word, is proclaim, which is a public and official statement. So it's kind of a lot of syllables in that. We know we have a document that is it's a public statement that's setting someone free. And there it is again. In real life, it was longer than this. This is the key parts to it. Okay, so obviously it came from Lincoln after Antietam, so has something to do with setting people free. I think we all can figure out that it's slaves. So the first question we need to ask, did it attempt to free all of the slaves? If not, which slaves did not gain their freedom under the proclamation? It did not attempt to free all the slaves. That's kind of the first myth of the Emancipation Proclamation. It only tried to free Confederate slaves, the slaves that were living in states that were a part of the CSA. It did not attempt to free the slaves in the border states. If you go back, that's the line that says states that are in rebellion. The states that are in rebellion are just your CSA states. You have 5 more border states that are still with the North. They are not getting freed. And there's the line. State the people whereof shall then be in rebellion. And then it goes on, against the United States shall be ever free. So not border state slaves. Border state slaves were not in rebellion. They did not secede. So why doesn't Lincoln free them? After all, Lincoln's an abolitionist. He hates slavery. Why isn't he freeing them? The reason why is he can't anger those border states. If he angers them, they could secede. They'll jump to the South, and now they will be fighting against the North. Lincoln can't afford that in the war. And if we think back, the war hasn't been going all that well for the first year and a half. Yeah, they had the big victory at Antietam, but in general, they are not winning against the South. How would the proclamation be enforced? What that means is, who's going to set those slaves free? And the answer was the military. As the military pushes across the South and conquers the South, if you will, it's going to be up to the army, mainly, to free those slaves. Why now? Why did Lincoln wait a year and a half? A couple reasons. By September 1862, the North was starting to achieve some of its war objectives. The blockade of the southern ports was going well. They had control of most of the Mississippi River, not all of the Mississippi River. They're still not near Richmond yet, but almost two of the 3 are accomplished. Then also Antietam. We spoke about that already. First big victory. So the North has a little bit of momentum. And then finally, abolitionists were pressuring Lincoln. They were calling him up and saying, Lincoln, look, you're an abolitionist. We voted for you. You have to do something about this. Okay, so once he issues it, how many slaves were immediately freed by the Emancipation? All of them? Half of them? Very few? The answer is very few. And the reason why was because the South considered itself to be its own country. They're gonna hear this Emancipation Proclamation. They're just gonna laugh at it. They're gonna say, "Hey, Lincoln, you're not our president anymore. We're not following that." But in southern states where the Union Army had control, they freed those slaves. But at this point in the war, the North controlled very little of the South. Most of the southern slaves were freed by the end of the war as the Northern Army swept across the South. Border states, let's go back to them. Legally, they did not have to release the slaves because the Emancipation Proclamation didn't call for it, although many of them did by the end of the war. I think they realized, especially by the end of the war, when everyone knows the North is going to win, that their slaves eventually are going to be released. somehow. They're going to do something else. In the end, it's going to be the 13th Amendment that bans slavery everywhere. But they realized it, so a lot of them did free their slaves. So why is this important? Number one, it added a goal to the war. At the beginning of the war, Lincoln's only stated goal was to keep the country together. Now it's official, what everyone had known all along. This was a war to end slavery. This was bad news for the South, because once this was issued, Europe, mainly Britain and France, they come out and say, we are not going to support the South in any way. We're not going to buy their cotton. We're not going to trade them guns. They felt like if they supported the South, they were supporting slavery, and they didn't have slaves in their countries. Finally, as a part of the Emancipation Proclamation, and we'll learn more about this later, the Union officially allowed African Americans to volunteer for the Northern Army. They did not draft them. Lincoln didn't think that was the right thing to do, but African Americans could volunteer, and thousands of them did. In the South, we've spoken about this. This